The sky above the Imperial city was a sickly green, torn with streaks of lightning and the smoke of burning manufactorums. On the horizon, the wall banners of the Orks snapped violently in the toxic wind, each one a herald of death and chaos. The ground trembled beneath the relentless march of the greenskin horde, thousands of Orks stomping in unison as if driven by some singular, unnatural will. Imperial Guardsmen, hastily assembled along the shattered streets, tried to form ranks, their lasguns trembling in their hands as they leveled at the oncoming tide. Smoke choked the air, and the acrid stench of ozone and burning promethium made the atmosphere thick and oppressive. Even the seasoned soldiers of the Imperium, veterans of countless campaigns, felt a primal unease. There was something different about this WAAAGH, a force of violence that seemed organized, purposeful, and terrifyingly intelligent. The first wave of Orks collided with the Imperial line in a cacophony of green-skinned fury. Bolters spat fire, and lasguns tore through the ranks, but the sheer weight of the Ork assault was overwhelming. Flesh met metal with sickening thuds, and Guardsmen were torn apart before their comrades could react. One by one, the Imperial soldiers fell, their disciplined formations shredded like paper under the relentless pounding. Among the Orks, something colossal stirred, a figure moving faster and stronger than any greenskin could naturally be. Hulk, the new god of this Ork horde, was already among them, his enormous frame hidden in the chaos but radiating a terrifying aura of power. He struck with precision and brutal efficiency, tossing massive Orks forward like ragdolls and smashing through barricades with his fists, shaping the battlefield as much as the Orks themselves did. The Space Marines arrived shortly after, descending from drop pods that screamed through the sky like falling comets. Blue, red, and black armor gleamed even through the haze of smoke and fire, bolters roaring as they targeted the Orks. They expected a typical Ork assault, ferocious but ultimately defeatable. Yet as they engaged, it became horrifyingly clear that this was no ordinary battle. Orks coordinated in unprecedented ways, flanking, retreating, and striking as though guided by a single omniscient mind. The towering Hulk moved among them with terrifying purpose, smashing through Space Marines with blows that shook the ground. A squad of Terminators charging to intercept him was obliterated in moments, the sound of cracking bones and exploding armor echoing across the ruined cityscape. One by one, even the most disciplined Space Marines fell, their battle cries cut short by Hulk's unstoppable power. From a command bunker overlooking the battlefield, Imperial officers and high-ranking leaders watched in growing horror. Orders were shouted over the comms, reinforcements called in, and plans hastily rewritten, but every tactic, every strategy crumbled against the force before them. The Imperium had faced countless threats, tyrannids, chaos warbands, demonic incursions, but nothing like this. The Orks moved as one, each stomp of their boots amplified by Hulk's godlike presence, each war cry echoing with a resonance that made even the bravest veteran flinch. Civilians caught in the city's outer sectors screamed as debris rained from the collapsing manufactorums, the streets awash in fire, smoke, and blood. Among the Space Marines, fear began to flicker even in the hearts of the most battle-hardened. Brother captains barked orders, but there was a sense of futility in the air. Hulk's strikes were surgical, destroying both soldiers and fortifications with a terrifying mixture of rage and precision. One by one, squads were annihilated. Bolters and chainswords could not pierce his thick, green-skinned mass. Even the heaviest armor seemed like paper against his crushing blows. He did not simply fight, he dominated, turning the battlefield itself into a weapon of mass destruction. Orks, sensing his divine power, roared with renewed fervor, their attacks more coordinated, more vicious, as if empowered by his presence. A lone commissar tried to rally the remaining guardsmen, shouting through the smoke, "Stand firm, for the Emperor, we are the shield of humanity." His voice was drowned by the roar of Hulk's triumph and the guttural cries of the Orks, and within moments he was lifted off the ground and thrown against the remnants of a manufactorum, his death a grim testament to the futility of resistance. Streets that had once been filled with disciplined formations of guardsmen were now rivers of blood and fire. The few surviving Space Marines tried to regroup, but the battlefield had already shifted irrevocably. Debris from collapsed buildings formed impromptu barricades, but even these could not slow the monstrous assault. Hulk himself became a figure of pure, unstoppable rage. Every swing of his massive arms sent shockwaves through the streets, toppling Orks and Space Marines alike. His footsteps shattered pavements, his roar scattered soldiers, and his eyes glowed with a primal intensity that could have been mistaken for psychic power. From the shadows of ruined buildings, he picked targets at will, hurling tanks into crowds, crushing bolter squads underfoot, and striking down even the largest Ork leaders who tried to control their frenzy. The Orks, sensing the presence of their god incarnate, followed his lead with an almost religious devotion. Each charge, each slash, each roar of war was synchronized with his devastating movements, turning a chaotic horde into a perfectly lethal instrument of destruction. As the first act neared its climax, the Imperium forces found themselves in disarray. The Guardsmen were nearly wiped out, their ranks shattered. The Space Marines who remained were injured, exhausted, and demoralized. Commanders struggled to issue coherent orders as communication lines were destroyed and entire regiments were annihilated. The realization hit like a hammer. This was not a battle the Imperium could win in conventional terms. The city was crumbling, manufactorums burned to the ground, and even the most heavily fortified bastions had been reduced to rubble. Civilians fled in terror, though few survived the rampage. And through it all, Hulk walked among the devastation, a godlike figure of unstoppable rage, his laughter mixing with the war cries of the Orks as the battlefield became a tableau of utter annihilation. Finally, a faint glimmer of hope appeared, or so it seemed, from the far horizon. From the outer edges of the ruined city, a new force approached. Elite Space Marines, Terminators, and specialized strike squads descending like avenging angels through the toxic sky. The commanders' faces, streaked with sweat and soot, lit with cautious hope. Perhaps these warriors could turn the tide. Yet deep in the hearts of all who watched, fear lingered. Fear of what they now recognized as no ordinary Ork WAAAGH, but the rise of a god incarnate. Hulk's eyes, scanning the horizon, fixed on the incoming reinforcements with predatory awareness, and a low, rumbling growl echoed through the ruined streets. The first act closed with the city burning, the Orks roaring in worship, and Hulk standing as an unchallenged, terrifying force. The Imperium's defenses, though vast, had been rendered meaningless.
As the distant rumble of drop pods tore through the smoky sky, the Imperium forces on the ground caught a fleeting glimpse of salvation, or at least what they hoped would be salvation. From the horizon descended the elite strike force of the Imperium, a carefully curated squad of Space Marines and specialized warriors, each clad in the heaviest armor, bearing the deadliest weapons known to humanity. Terminators, storm bolters, and power fists glinted in the eerie light of the burning city, while Grey Knights hovered on jetpacks, their psychic powers crackling visibly, forming halos of energy around their helmets. Even the most battle-hardened guardsmen, now scattered and terrified, looked up with desperate hope, whispering prayers to the Emperor. Yet as the pods slammed into the ground and their armored occupants stormed forth, the grim reality of the battlefield remained. The Orks were not mere soldiers. They were a force unified under a god, a monster whose presence distorted reality itself. The special force landed amidst the chaos, weapons blazing, engines screaming, as the Orks momentarily faltered under the precision of their assault. Bolters tore into greenskin ranks, and psychic blasts from the Grey Knights shredded swaths of Orks in a display of devastating discipline. For a brief moment, it seemed as though the Imperium's elite warriors might stem the tide, yet the air itself seemed to quiver with the presence of Hulk, whose massive form emerged from the smoke and debris like a living colossus. His skin, cracked with green energy and glistening with sweat and blood, radiated a power that even the strongest minds struggled to comprehend. Each movement he made warped the battlefield, hurling Orks into frenzy and flattening any who dared approach too closely. The elite squads realized immediately that they were no longer fighting a normal WAAAGH. They were confronting a divine warlord, a living embodiment of rage amplified to terrifying proportions. The first clash was cataclysmic, a squad of Terminators hurling themselves forward with bolters spitting fire and power fists smashing into Orks attempted to isolate Hulk from the horde, but their strikes bounced off his skin as if hitting solid steel, and with a single swing of his massive arm, Hulk sent 2 Terminators flying into the rubble of a destroyed manufactorum. Their armor cracked and twisted, servo motors sparking uselessly as they lay broken and unmoving. Nearby, Grey Knights unleashed psychic fire, summoning warp energy to strike down dozens of Orks at once. Yet, with every Ork that fell, Hulk seemed to grow stronger, his rage feeding the horde's cohesion. The battlefield had become a storm of destruction, and even the most precise tactics of the Imperium began to crumble under the combined might of Hulk and the Ork God Force. Amidst the chaos, a captain of the elite Space Marines shouted orders with voice booming over the din of battle. "Focus fire! We must take him down before he crushes the city entirely." Squads shifted, coordinated attacks forming, bolter volleys synchronized with psychic bursts, seeking to trap Hulk in crossfire. The initial attacks staggered him only slightly, causing tremors that shattered nearby structures, raining debris onto friend and foe alike. Hulk's fury was palpable, an aura that inspired the Orks and terrified the humans, making the air itself feel heavy, oppressive, and deadly. Each of his movements sent shockwaves through the battlefield, hurling vehicles, toppling Ork mobs, and annihilating squads of Space Marines in seconds. The Special Forces strategy shifted from frontal assault to tactical precision. Small units flanked, aiming to encircle Hulk and cut off the Orks from their guard. Jetpack-equipped Marines darted between rubble and debris, launching grenades and energy blasts in an attempt to distract him. Yet Hulk's reaction was terrifyingly swift. He moved with inhuman speed, swinging entire armored vehicles like toys, crushing units underfoot and sending shockwaves that threw squads into the air. Every attempt to isolate him was met with devastating retaliation. It became clear to even the most disciplined warriors that they were not fighting merely a powerful Ork warlord. They were facing a being who was, in essence, invincible, while the horde followed him.
Amid the swirling chaos, the Grey Knights attempted a coordinated psychic strike, attempting to banish the raw, godlike energy emanating from Hulk. Their combined willpower focused in a glowing prism of energy, aiming to shatter his mind before it could crush theirs. But Hulk seemed almost aware of their intentions, pausing just long enough to glance in their direction before smashing the ground with such force that the psychic blast ricocheted harmlessly, scattering the Space Marines across the debris-strewn battlefield. Orks surged forward with renewed fury, emboldened by their god's unstoppable dominance. Bolter fire, plasma blasts, and chain swords were torn asunder, weapons breaking or bending under the sheer kinetic force of Hulk's strikes. The Imperium forces tried to regroup, forming defensive lines and using the remaining barricades as temporary cover. But Hulk was no longer a singular target. He was the orchestrator of the battlefield itself. He hurled Orks into attacks, crushed armored vehicles into obstacles, and toppled entire buildings, creating a living, moving weapon of destruction. Every attempt by the special force to strike him down only seemed to empower him further, as though the resistance fueled his divine rage. From above, the sky was filled with the flashes of explosions, the crackle of psychic energy, and the deafening roar of Hulk's voice, mingling with the war cries of the Orks, echoing like the sound of a planet cracking under divine wrath. Even the most veteran of Space Marine captains could not maintain morale. Orders became desperate shouts, strategies devolved into improvisation, and squads were thrown into panic. Yet, amidst the hopelessness, individual acts of heroism emerged. A small squad of Terminators held a critical choke point, sacrificing themselves to delay Hulk's advance, buying precious seconds for the rest of the Imperium's command structure. Grenades detonated, bolter rounds flew, and one Marine even managed to land a crippling blow against a hulking Ork that Hulk had used as a battering ram. These fleeting victories, however, were mere sparks against the inferno of destruction Hulk unleashed, his strength and divine presence far beyond what the Imperium could counter. As the battle reached its crescendo, Hulk's rage escalated to godlike levels. Buildings crumbled beneath his steps, Orks charged with fanatical devotion, and the Imperium elite forces struggled to maintain even a semblance of order. The city's streets were rivers of smoke, fire, and gore. Tanks lay mangled like toys, bolter squads lay scattered like rag dolls, and the air was thick with the screams of the dying. Hulk's presence alone seemed to warp the battlefield, each movement creating tremors and shockwaves that defied comprehension. The Special Force realized, with horror, that even if they survived the immediate onslaught, they were now fighting not just a god among Orks, but a force that could reshape the very fabric of the planet's defense. By the time the first hour of the battle concluded, the Imperium's elite units were in tatters. The few surviving Space Marines, bruised, battered, and trembling, regrouped under the shadow of Hulk's colossal form. Orks roared their triumph, worshipping their god as the streets were cleared of resistance. The Imperium's leaders in distant command bunkers watched in despair, realizing that the only hope now lay in either miracles or the arrival of reinforcements beyond what they had ever anticipated. And amidst the chaos, Hulk stood towering, unchallenged, a godlike figure of raw strength, orchestrating the destruction of the Imperium with terrifying ease. The battlefield had been reshaped entirely to his will, and the Special Force, though brave, understood the horrifying truth. The Orks' god was unstoppable, and the fate of the Imperium itself now teetered on the edge of annihilation.
The battlefield was unrecognizable. Streets once teeming with disciplined soldiers now lay cracked and ruined, buildings torn to splinters, vehicles overturned and burning, their engines screaming with sparks of molten metal. The smoke from fires rising like black clouds into the toxic green sky blocked the horizon, and the cries of the dying echoed through the desolate cityscape. In the midst of this chaos, Hulk strode forward, his massive form cutting through the wreckage with terrifying ease. His skin glowed faintly with a sickly green energy, cracked and pulsing as though charged by the collective fury of the Orks surrounding him. The Horde obeyed him not through fear, but through divine instinct. Every stomp of his foot, every swing of his fists seemed to coordinate the movements of the Orks, transforming what was once a chaotic mob into a devastatingly efficient killing machine. The remaining Imperium forces had attempted to regroup, but hope was rapidly diminishing. A handful of Space Marines, battered and exhausted, formed a defensive perimeter near the remnants of a fortified cathedral. Bolters fired in disciplined volleys, and power weapons clashed with Ork weapons in sparks of lethal metal. Yet even these elite warriors, the pride of humanity, could not withstand the overwhelming force of Hulk and his divine army. He moved with preternatural speed, each punch crushing armor, hurling enemies into rubble, and sending shockwaves that toppled barricades.
Space Marines who had once been paragons of discipline were thrown aside like rag dolls. Even tanks fired with precision exploded against him harmlessly. He tore through armor plating, crushing engines and scattering crews into the flames. Hulk's roar echoed across the battlefield, reverberating off crumbling walls and through the smoky air, carrying with it an almost physical force. Orks surged forward with renewed vigor, their WAAAGH cries mixing with the godlike bellow of their leader. Every orc seemed to gain strength from his presence. Wounds that would have felled them hours ago seemed to close almost miraculously, and every attack they launched was perfectly timed, perfectly coordinated. The Imperium forces were caught in a whirlwind of destruction, unable to mount even a momentary counterattack. Elite squads attempted flanking maneuvers, hoping to trap him, but Hulk anticipated each move with terrifying precision. Tanks were torn apart, heavy weapons dismounted and destroyed, and every trench the Imperium tried to hold became a death trap. From above, the sky was a chaotic storm of fire and smoke. Drop pods continued to fall, disgorging reinforcements who met almost instantaneous death at Hulk's hands. Bolter fire illuminated the battlefield in staccato bursts, and energy weapons flared in desperate strikes against the unstoppable god. But each assault seemed only to fuel Hulk's fury, amplifying his godlike strength with each strike. He struck not just at soldiers, but at the very environment, uprooting lampposts, tearing chunks from buildings to hurl as projectiles, and collapsing structures onto enemy lines. The city had become a living instrument of war under his control, and even those who had once commanded legions found themselves powerless in the face of his omnipotence. The Imperium's high command, stationed in distant command bunkers, could only watch helplessly. Reports from the field came in fragmented, broken by interference and static, each one more horrifying than the last. Entire regiments had been wiped out, armored divisions reduced to smoking husks, and even the elite Space Marines were falling in staggering numbers. The Emperor himself was observing the devastation, his psychic gaze reaching across the battlefield. He felt the immense presence of Hulk, a force unlike anything he had faced in millennia of war. It was not merely strength that defined him, but an almost divine, inexorable will that shaped the actions of the orcs around him. Every decision, every movement, every strike radiated a terrifying certainty. Resistance was futile.
The few surviving squads of Space Marines and Guardsmen attempted desperate measures. Commissars barked orders through the chaos, rallying soldiers to hold positions and make last stands, but the effects were minimal. Hulk moved through these lines with unstoppable momentum. With a single swing of his fist, he shattered a squad of Space Marines huddled behind the remnants of a collapsed wall. Bolts of energy from plasma guns sizzled harmlessly as he caught tanks mid-fire and crushed them beneath his massive hands. Even heavily armored Terminators fell victim to his raw power, their ceramite plating dented and shattered by blows that could have split mountains. The battlefield had become a nightmare of destruction, an unstoppable tidal wave of muscle, green fury, and divine wrath. As the battle pressed on, the city itself seemed to respond to Hulk's power. Streets buckled beneath his steps, buildings shuddered and split, and the very ground groaned as though in pain. Orks rode into battle on warped contraptions of metal and bone, propelled by his divine presence, charging with precision and rage. The few remaining fortifications became useless, either destroyed by Hulk's sheer physicality or overrun by his fanatical followers. Even the heaviest fortresses crumbled under sustained assault, the walls collapsing with explosive force as Hulk tore through them to reach the remaining defenders. Each victory fueled his rage further, and each act of destruction increased the reverence with which the orcs worshipped him. Imperial officers tried to coordinate counterattacks, but the situation was hopeless. Every attempt at strategy was preempted by Hulk's divine foresight.
Tanks were flung aside before they could fire, squads were decimated before they could organize, and psychic strikes were deflected or nullified as Hulk's presence disrupted the very energies of the battlefield. The few survivors of the initial waves tried to retreat, but escape was impossible. Hulk moved with terrifying speed, intercepting any who attempted to flee. Entire streets were swept clean of defenders, leaving only fire, rubble, and the unchallenged might of the Orks' god. Amidst this devastation, small pockets of heroism flared briefly. A squad of space marines, armed with relic weapons and determined to make a final stand, formed a defensive line in the ruins of a cathedral. Bolters roared and chainswords met Ork armor with sparks and screams. For a brief moment, it seemed as though they might hold Hulk at bay, but the illusion shattered within seconds. Hulk strode through the rubble like a living mountain, swatting aside tanks and throwing Orks with terrifying precision to crush the defenders. The Space Marine's heroic sacrifices delayed him only briefly, buying mere moments before the cathedral itself collapsed under his power.
The battlefield was now a tableau of utter annihilation. Smoke and fire obscured the horizon, punctuated by the occasional explosion or the crack of shattering armor. Orks, inspired to near religious frenzy by Hulk's presence, surged forward with unstoppable momentum, cleaving the last remnants of disciplined resistance. Even the heaviest artillery was rendered useless, either destroyed in the initial onslaught or obliterated in Hulk's march of devastation. The city was a ruin, streets rivers of molten metal and fire, and the cries of the wounded and dying mingled with the triumphant roar of the Orks. It was at this moment that the Emperor himself intervened. Appearing at the front lines in a burst of psychic radiance, he descended onto the battlefield, his form blazing with divine light. Waves of psychic energy tore through the air, knocking Orks aside and blasting away rubble. Bolstered by his immense power, the remaining Imperium forces rallied momentarily, hoping to turn the tide. Yet even the Emperor, for all his might, faced a foe of unparalleled strength. Hulk, sensing the presence of his ultimate opponent, stopped amidst the chaos and turned toward the radiance, his eyes glowing with fury and green energy. The ground quaked beneath his feet as he charged, each step annihilating the defenses around him. The clash of divine power and unstoppable rage was imminent. Hulk's charge was cataclysmic. Psychic waves from the Emperor met the raw physical force of Hulk head-on, creating explosions of energy that flattened city blocks and sent Orks and Space Marines alike sprawling. Yet Hulk's strength was absolute. Every strike he landed tore through the Emperor's protective wards and shattered the terrain beneath them. Orks rallied with renewed fervor, inspired by their god's might, and surged forward to support him, creating a wall of green fury around the colossal Hulk. The Emperor unleashed every ounce of his psychic power, summoning storms of fire, energy, and telekinetic force, yet it seemed only to slow Hulk for a heartbeat. Every attack was met with devastating retaliation, and the battlefield became a maelstrom of divine combat, fire, and destruction. In the end, the inevitability of Hulk's power became undeniable. The Emperor, even at his most divine and powerful, could not match the combination of Hulk's godlike strength and the worshipful coordination of the Orks. With a final, earth-shattering strike, Hulk subdued the Emperor physically, lifting him high into the air as Orks roared in adoration. The Imperium's remaining defenders fell to their knees, broken in body and spirit, witnessing the fall of the greatest champion of humanity. Hulk's triumph was absolute. The battlefield was silent but for the roars of the victorious Orks and the ragged breathing of the few survivors, scattered and broken. The Imperium had been shattered, its finest soldiers annihilated, and its Emperor captured.
As Hulk stood amid the ruin, towering over the remnants of the once mighty Imperium forces, the Orks gathered around him in worshipful frenzy. The city, now a ruined testament to unstoppable power, smoldered beneath a sky streaked with fire and smoke. The Emperor, chained and defeated, was brought low before his new captor, a living symbol of the Imperium's utter defeat. Hulk's laughter echoed across the battlefield, mingling with the WAAAGH cries of the Orks, signaling the dawn of a new era, an era ruled by the unstoppable god of Orks, whose rage had toppled the mightiest empire in the galaxy.
The battlefield, once a theater of relentless destruction, had quieted only in the sense that the surviving forces of the Imperium no longer dared move. Smoke rose in vast columns from shattered manufactorums, half-collapsed cathedrals, and toppled statues of heroes long dead. The streets were rivers of molten metal, ash, and blood, the cries of the wounded now replaced by the haunting silence of the dead. Yet amidst the devastation, one figure stood unchallenged, a towering colossus of green fury, the god of the Orks himself, Hulk. His massive fists still glowed faintly with the energy of his wrath, and his breathing echoed across the ruins like the tolling of a bell of doom. Around him, the Orks had gathered in a frenzy of adoration, their war cries mingling with the low rumble of the planet itself, a hymn to their new deity. The Imperium, once proud and eternal, lay shattered, its finest armies annihilated, and the Emperor, who had withstood millennia of war and chaos, now faced the ultimate test of his will. As Hulk strode forward through the ruins, the remaining Imperial defenders, those too injured or frozen by fear to flee, scrambled to regroup, bolters trembling in their hands. Some attempted to fire upon him, hoping for a miracle that never came. The blasts of plasma and bolter rounds, once capable of tearing through armored giants, struck only sparks against his thickened, godlike skin. Hulk's eyes scanned the battlefield with terrifying focus, each glance directing the Orks around him to move with coordinated precision, annihilating any last pockets of resistance. Entire streets were emptied in moments as Hulk's presence alone reshaped the flow of combat. Debris became weapons, rubble became barricades, and even the air seemed to bend under the force of his godlike rage. He moved like a mountain incarnate, unstoppable and inexorable, each step a declaration that the Imperium's era of dominance had come to a violent, irrevocable end. Amid the chaos, a psychic resonance pulsed across the battlefield, the unmistakable, overwhelming presence of the Emperor himself. Appearing at the center of the devastated city, the Emperor radiated a light so intense it turned smoke to ash, and heat waves distorted the very air around him. He descended slowly, robes flowing, psychic energy crackling around him like a storm. His eyes, blazing with millennia of wisdom and unyielding will, fixed upon Hulk. For the first time in the battle, the Orks themselves paused, sensing the arrival of a power even their god could not ignore. Hulk, sensing the challenge, stopped in mid-step, his fists clenching as the air seemed to vibrate with anticipation. The battlefield held its breath, the horrors of the past hours suspended in a moment of charged silence. The confrontation was immediate and cataclysmic. The Emperor unleashed a wave of psychic energy, toppling Orks in a storm of telekinetic force, shattering walls and flattening the surrounding streets. Bolters fired in tandem, Space Marines and surviving Guardsmen launched a coordinated counterattack, desperate to buy their master precious moments. But Hulk was not merely a physical being, he had become a divine instrument of war, a focal point of rage and Orkish devotion. He moved through the psychic blasts as though wading through air, shrugging off energy that would have annihilated any mortal warrior. With a roar that shook the city to its foundations, he slammed into the Emperor with the force of a falling star, sending waves of concussive energy across the battlefield. Bolts of energy cracked against his skin, armor shattered beneath his fists, and the Emperor's psychic shields flickered under the overwhelming force.
The clash between the two godlike beings shook the remnants of the city. Entire buildings crumbled in clouds of dust and fire as their powers collided. Hulk's strength was raw, visceral, and unstoppable. The Emperor's was precise, disciplined, and radiant. Every strike from Hulk tore chunks of earth and concrete from the battlefield, hurling them as devastating projectiles. Every psychic blast from the Emperor incinerated entire blocks of Orks, yet even in destruction, Hulk advanced relentlessly. Orks surged forward with renewed fervor, inspired by their god's divine presence. Their attacks were perfectly timed with Hulk's movements, creating a seamless, unstoppable assault on the remnants of the Imperium's defenses. Even the Emperor, with all his millennia of war and chaos, found himself struggling against the raw, unrelenting fury of the Hulk-Ork god. Survival instinct drove the remaining Space Marines to form defensive lines around their leader, holding their ground with grim determination, but their numbers were dwindling rapidly. Hulk moved like an unstoppable force, crushing their defenses one by one. Power fists smashed through Terminators, bolter rounds were deflected harmlessly, and chainswords shattered against the godlike mass of muscle and green energy. Every heroic stand was short-lived, a mere ripple against the tidal wave of destruction Hulk embodied. He tore through squads with ease, his movements precise yet devastating, as if the battlefield itself bent to his will. Buildings fell in his wake, barricades crumbled underfoot, and even the air seemed to bend under the force of his godlike rage.
The Emperor, realizing the futility of conventional tactics, unleashed the full extent of his psychic might. His aura flared across the battlefield like a second sun, sending shockwaves of pure energy in every direction. Waves of Orks were obliterated, the air shimmered with heat and psychic distortion, and even Hulk staggered slightly under the intensity of the Emperor's divine assault. For a fleeting moment, hope flickered in the hearts of the surviving Imperium forces. Yet even this moment of brilliance was consumed by the overwhelming, inexorable rage of Hulk. With a roar that shook the planet itself, he surged forward, shrugging off the Emperor's psychic strikes, closing the distance with terrifying speed. The ground cracked beneath his steps, debris and bodies flying in every direction, until he stood before the Emperor himself. What followed was a clash of unimaginable force. Fists and psychic energy collided, tearing the very air apart. Hulk's blows were devastating, his godlike strength matched only by the Emperor's psychic might. The city shook, buildings collapsed, and the sky above twisted with energy as the two forces battled for supremacy. Orks surged forward in coordinated frenzy, forming a protective barrier around their god. The Emperor summoned storms of fire, beams of psychic energy, and telekinetic strikes. Yet with each attack, Hulk grew more attuned to the battle, moving with precision, striking with divine force. Slowly, the inevitability of victory for the Hulk-Ork god became clear. Even the Emperor, for all his power and wisdom, could not match the combination of raw physicality, divine rage, and orcish devotion that propelled Hulk. Finally, in a climactic moment, Hulk delivered a strike so powerful it shattered the psychic shields of the Emperor. With a thunderous roar, he seized the Emperor in his massive hands, lifting him high above the battlefield. The remaining Orks roared in adoration, their cries echoing across the shattered cityscape. The Emperor, radiating power yet unable to resist physically, struggled in vain against the overwhelming might of Hulk. In that instant, the Imperium's greatest champion, the being who had held the galaxy together for millennia, was reduced to a captive of the Orks' new god. The remaining defenders, seeing their leader captured, fell to their knees in despair. Any thought of counterattack or resistance vanished. The Imperium, in this moment, was truly broken. Hulk set the Emperor down amidst the rubble, chains of orcish warp-forged metal binding him tightly. The Emperor's light flickered but did not extinguish entirely, his will still burning, yet he was powerless against the sheer physical and divine presence of Hulk.
The Orks circled around their god, chanting in unison, their devotion palpable, their WAAAGH cries rising to a deafening crescendo. Hulk's massive chest heaved with rage and triumph, and the ground itself seemed to shiver beneath him. Every structure, every battlefield scar, every fallen soldier bore testament to his unstoppable power. The city, now a ruin of unimaginable scale, lay quiet save for the chants and roars of the victorious Orks. Fires still burned in pockets across the streets, smoke curling into the sky like twisted monuments of destruction. Hulk's form loomed over the battlefield, a symbol of divine wrath, while the Emperor remained chained, kneeling as the ultimate symbol of the Imperium's defeat. The remaining humans, broken in spirit and body, were left to witness a new era, the age of Hulk as the god of the Orks, a being whose rage had toppled empires and shattered the galaxy's most formidable armies. As Hulk raised his fists to the sky, the Orks around him roared in worship, their cries echoing into the void. The galaxy itself trembled beneath the weight of this new god, and the Imperium, once eternal, had fallen in a single unstoppable onslaught. The battlefield was a testament to the power of divine rage, a grim monument to the absolute triumph of Hulk, whose might had redefined the very meaning of war and destruction. Even in chains, the Emperor's psychic presence could not undo what had been wrought. The Orks' WAAAGH had found its god, and the galaxy would never be the same again.